27 bombers, stacked in formation, and you have never seen this many enemy aircraft in one place in your life. You are a Spitfire pilot with Fighter Command, climbing hard through 9,000 feet over Kent, and the formation ahead of you stretches wider than anything the briefing room prepared you for. Somewhere behind those bombers, fighter escorts are waiting above the sun, exactly where you have learned the hard way that they always wait. Your radio crackles. Tally-ho calls a voice you know. Brake and engage. You roll the Spitfire onto its back and pull down into a dive toward the bomber stream. Throttle fully open, engine screaming. Your hands are steady on the controls, though your heart is doing something considerably less disciplined. Somewhere above you, a shape drops out of glare, and you do not yet know if it is one of yours. Your gloved hand tightens on the control column, and you force your breathing back into something resembling a rhythm you can actually work with. Pull back. But to understand how you ended up alone in that dive, you need to go back to the summer that changed everything and the airfield where it all began. It is July, and the Battle of Britain, though nobody has named it that yet, has already been running for weeks. You are 22 years old, newly posted to a fighter squadron at a sector station in Kent, and you have exactly 40 hours on Spitfires, most of them logged in the last fortnight alone. Your commanding officer, Squadron Leader Whitlock, does not waste words on new pilots. He tells you, on your first morning, that half the men in this mess will not see September, and that the only thing that changes those odds even slightly is discipline in the air. You are not entirely sure, walking away from that briefing, whether you feel prepared or simply warned. A fellow pilot officer named Harry Finch takes you under his wing the same week, showing you which corner of the dispersal hut has the least uncomfortable armchair and exactly how many seconds it actually takes to get airborne when the scramble bell rings, which turns out to be considerably fewer than you would have guessed possible. You are issued a Mae Westlife jacket, a silk map sewn into the lining of your flying jacket, and a service revolver you privately hope, exactly like every other new pilot before you, never to have any genuine reason to use. Harry tells you, with the confidence of a man who has survived exactly one more week of this than you have, that the silk map has saved more downed pilots than the revolver ever will. Your mother, back home, still believes you were assigned to a training role well away from the coast, a small kindness you have maintained in every letter home since your very first week of operational flying. The airfield itself is close enough to the coast that you can sometimes hear anti-aircraft guns from Dover on a still evening, a distant reminder that the fighting rarely stays confined to daylight hours alone. Before you go further, if stepping inside history like this is what you're here for, subscribe to POV Chronicles right now. Every story on this channel puts you inside a real moment from the past, researched carefully and brought to life with careful cinematic detail. Now back to the story. Your first scramble comes 2 days later, the bells shattering the dispersal hut's card game before anyone finishes their hand. You sprint across the grass toward your waiting Spitfire, ground crew already spinning propeller as you climb aboard. You are airborne in under 4 minutes, climbing hard to a raid still forming up over the channel, and your hands do not stop shaking properly until you're already in the fight. You fly 3, sometimes 4 sorties a day through the following weeks, landing only long enough to refuel, rearm, and occasionally eat something standing up before the bell rings again. Ground crew work in a blur around your aircraft between sorties, patching bullet holes with fabric, and dope faster than you can properly finish a cup of tea. Harry keeps a private tally of your victories in greased pencil on the dispersal hut wall, updated after every landing regardless of how exhausted either of you actually is. He draws a small, unmistakably terrible cartoon Spitfire beside your name that grows one additional swastika kill marking every time you land with confirmed victory. You lose your first squadron mate in early August, a quiet Yorkshireman who never got the chance to properly introduce himself to you before a burst of cannon fire ended his war in about 4 seconds. Squadron Leader Whitlock reads out his name at the following morning's briefing in the same flat voice he uses for everything else, because there is no time in this schedule for anything gentler. You learn to sleep in your flying gear, boots already laced, because the difference between 3 minutes and 4 minutes airborne has already cost pilots you have personally flown alongside. By the middle of August, you have stopped counting your own sorties, and started simply trusting your body to fly the aircraft while your mind stays fixed on the sky above and behind you, exactly where the danger always seems to come from first. Some evenings, when weather grounds every squadron in the sector, you and Harry cycle into the nearby village for a pint, still faintly smelling of engine oil and cordite, and try, with limited success, to talk about anything other than the sky. Squadron Leader Whitlock takes to walking the dispersal line personally most mornings, saying little but noting, in a small logbook he never shares with anyone, which pilots are flying well, and which ones are simply flying tired, a distinction he tells you privately is far more dangerous than any German fighter. You bring down your first confirmed kill during your second week of operations, a bomber peeling away trailing smoke over the channel, and you feel considerably less triumphant about it than the cheering in the mess that evening seems to expect from you. Rain grounds the entire squadron for 2 full days in late July, and you spend most of it asleep. Catching up on a debt your body has been quietly accumulating since your very first scramble. You write to your mother every single week without fail, keeping the letters deliberately light, though Harry once catches you staring at a blank page for the better part of 20 minutes before you finally find the right careful sentence. News reaches the squadron before official orders do, the way it always seems to. Intelligence suggests the Luftwaffe is planning something considerably larger than the raids you have faced so far, a coordinated effort meant to finally break Fighter Command before any invasion becomes possible. Squadron Leader Whitlock briefs the entire squadron at first light on the 15th of September, standing in front of a chalkboard covered in radar plots that keep multiplying even as he speaks. Multiple raids, he tells you, converging on London from several directions at once. Every squadron in 11 Group will be scrambled today, more than once, possibly several times before the light fails. Harry taps your shoulder before you climb into your cockpit, the same small ritual he has repeated before every sortie since your very first week together. You do not discuss what either of you already knows, which is that today is likely to be worse than anything you have faced so far this summer. Ground crew swarm your aircraft one final time, checking ammunition belts and fuel with a speed that has become almost invisible to you after weeks of watching it happen. You climb aboard, strap in, and give your rigger the same small nod you've given every single morning since your first scramble. You are airborne within minutes of the scramble bell, climbing hard through scattered cloud toward a formation size that ground control has clearly underestimated on the radio. By the time you reach altitude, you can see it for yourself, stretching from one side of the sky to the other, more bombers in a single formation than you have ever personally witnessed in one place. You check your own instruments one final time before takeoff, a habit that has become as automatic as breathing after weeks of daily sorties, though today it feels considerably more deliberate than usual. A junior pilot barely out of training joins the squadron the previous week, and you find yourself, without quite meaning to, repeating almost exactly the same advice Harry once gave you about the dispersal hut armchairs and the scramble bell, an inheritance neither of you ever formally agreed to pass along. Ground crew chalk a small, hopeful message on the side of your aircraft before you climb aboard. The kind of gallows humor that has become standard practice across the entire squadron by this point in the summer. You notice, taxiing out for takeoff, that the number of serviceable aircraft on the line has grown noticeably thinner than it was at the start of August, though nobody on the ground crew comments on it directly. The dispersal hut wall, still covered in Harry's grease pencil tally marks, has become something of an unofficial squadron record, and more than one visiting officer has stopped to study it in silence before moving on without comment. Harry, for his part, insists the tally is bringing you luck, and refuses on principle to ever wash the chalk dust from his own flying jacket sleeve. You break formation with the rest of your squadron, diving toward the bomber stream exactly as briefed, picking a target near the formation's edge where the fighter escort's coverage is thinnest. Your first burst of fire rakes across a bomber's wing route, and you bank hard away before its gunners can properly track you. You climb back for a second pass, adrenaline overriding the fatigue of 3 previous sorties that same day. Tracer fire streaks past your canopy from somewhere behind and above, and you throw the Spitfire into a violent corkscrew turn, the horizon spinning wildly across your windscreen. Something hits your own aircraft from above and behind, a violent metallic hammering that shudders through the entire airframe. Your instrument panel sprays glass and fragments across your gloved hands. Smoke begins pouring from somewhere behind the engine cowling. thick and immediate, filling the cockpit faster than you can process. You are losing control surfaces. The stick fights you with a heaviness that was not there 30 seconds ago, and the smoke is thickening enough that you can no longer clearly see your own instruments. Your altimeter, the last gauge still visible through the haze, is unwinding faster than feels survivable. You have perhaps a few seconds to decide whether this aircraft is still flyable or whether you are about to become another name read out flatly at tomorrow's briefing. You think, absurdly, of Harry's terrible cartoon Spitfire on the dispersal hut wall, and wonder, with whatever part of your mind is still capable of wondering anything at all, whether today add a new mark to that tally or ends it entirely. Below you, London itself is visible through gaps in the scattered cloud, rooftops and streets entirely indifferent to the desperate arithmetic being worked out several thousand feet above them. Your engine note changes pitch beneath you, a subtle wrongness you would not have noticed a month ago but now recognize instantly, the kind of instinct that only comes from several hundred hours spent listening to nothing else. For one disorienting moment, sun glares directly through your windscreen, and the entire sky ahead simply disappears into white glare until your eyes adjust half a second later. You key your own radio once, a short transmission reporting damage and position, though you cannot be entirely certain, given the state of your instrument panel, that anyone actually receives it clearly. You hold the aircraft as level as you can manage, buying seconds you are not certain you actually have. You wrench the canopy release and feel the slipstream tear away entirely, cold air replacing smoke in an instant. You release your harness, plant a boot against the seat, and throw yourself clear of the stricken aircraft, tumbling through open sky with no clear sense of up or down for several genuinely terrifying seconds. You pull the ripcord, and the parachute deploys with a violent jolt that nearly separates your shoulders from your body, but you are suddenly, blessedly, falling slowly instead of catastrophically. Above you, your own aircraft spirals downward trailing black smoke before finally striking open farmland. In a distant, muffled impact you feel more than properly hear. Somewhere in the wider sky, the battle you were just part of continues without you, dozens of aircraft still turning and diving in a fight too vast to fully take in from this angle. A pair of fighters cross paths directly above your drifting parachute, neither one appearing to notice the pilot dangling helplessly beneath them. You land hard in a Ken Hop field, rolling awkwardly through low vines, parachute collapsing in a great pale sheet across the rows behind you. A farmer runs toward you across the field, pitchfork still in hand from whatever he was doing before an RAF pilot fell out of the sky onto his crop. He helps you struggle free of the parachute harness, hands shaking almost as badly as your own, and asks, with an admirable calmness given the circumstances, whether you like a cup of tea before or after he telephones the nearest airfield. You are alive, bruised, shaken, entirely unable to stop your hands trembling now that there is finally nothing left to hold steady for, but alive, and above you, the formation you helped break is already scattering back toward the channel, harried the entire way by squadrons still very much in the fight. Word of your survival reaches a squadron before you do, carried by the same telephone call the farmer eventually makes, though the message that actually arrives at dispersal is considerably shorter and less detailed than the afternoon you have actually just lived through. The T, when it eventually arrives an hour later via a rather startled Home Guard patrol, turns out to be exactly as good as the farmer promised, a small, ordinary kindness that somehow does more to steady your nerves than anything else that entire afternoon. You keep the parachute itself, silk still faintly stained with hopfield mud, long after the war ends, a strange, deliberately kept reminder of the single worst and luckiest afternoon of your entire life. Squadron Leader Whitlock, you learn afterward, personally telephoned the farmer's exchange 3 separate times that evening before confirmation of your survival finally reached the airfield. You notice absurdly that your hands are still trembling even as the farmer walks you toward his cottage for that promised cup of tea, a delayed reaction your body seems determined to work through entirely on its own schedule. You are back at the airfield by evening, delivered by a rather bemused Home Guard patrol who found the farmer's account of the afternoon considerably harder to believe than you did. Harry meets you at the gate, and for once, says absolutely nothing about the tally on the dispersal hut wall. The 15th of September becomes, in the weeks that follow, the day historians eventually call the turning point of the entire battle, the day an invasion that never quite arrives as quietly, permanently postponed by a country that simply refused to lose the sky above it. You fly again 3 days later, in a replacement aircraft that smells faintly of fresh paint. Harry does not survive the following month, and squadron leader Whitlock reads his name out in the same flat voice he uses for everyone else, because that voice, you finally understand, was never actually cold. It was simply the only way through. If a story like this is what you come to POV Chronicles for, subscribe right now. Step into the next one with us. Hit like if that moment tumbling clear of a burning cockpit, with no idea which way was down, hit you the way it hit us researching it. And drop a comment below. First, could you have made that decision in time? Second, let us know where in the world you're watching this from.